'Tis the season for gift giving, at least for gift buying, which, by the way, is anyone already done? Got your list all wiped out, complete? Wow. Teach me your ways, oh master. I see you over there, maybe a couple of you. That's pretty impressive. But you know, this time of year, as we're kind of in this gift buying, thinking of gift giving, planning for all that, the age-old question comes to mind, the age-old debate. Do good things come in small packages, or are the best gifts things that you can't put in boxes at all? Let's think about this for a second. Diamonds, pretty good gift. They come in small packages. On the other side, a new car, hey, that's not bad either, right? You can't box that. Or one of the hottest gifts of the year, AirPods Pro. Tiny little things come in a very small package. But if you want to get the heart of the men in the room, skip the AirPods Pro, go straight for the big green egg. Look at that thing. I'll take one of each if anyone's watching or listening. I don't know if you're a musical theater lover. It's a little early, but May is coming. Hamilton is coming back to St. Louis. Anybody, Hamilton? I think there are like 2 million people trying to get tickets to Hamilton, and apparently 4 of them go to this church. I don't know what that says. All the yay for Hamilton. Woo, Hamilton. Anyway, Hamilton tickets, that'd be an awesome gift. You could wrap those tickets up, right, for Christmas. That'd be an amazing Christmas present for someone. But you know, really, when you think about it, does anything say Christmas better than a newborn baby? Anyone getting one of those for Christmas? Anybody? Hopefully it's not a surprise. And don't ever put them in the box, even with holes in them. Now, I don't know if we've solved anything today in this debate, but here's what I can say as we're talking about gifts, and specifically as we're talking about the kinds that do fit in boxes, what this often leads us to is the game that we play, the game called, Ooh, I Know What That Is. Now, you've played this game before, I promise you. You see the gift sitting there on the table under the tree, wherever it is. And the first step is you visually scope it all out. You look at its dimensions. You try to assess what it could be, certainly what it couldn't be. Definitely not a big green egg in there. I'm just gonna say that's not the smoker that I want. Step 2, you wait till no one's looking and you go up and you quickly pick up the box, right? You assess its weight, and immediately you can detect a few more things about it. Then you give another quick look each direction, make sure no one is coming, and you give it a little subtle shake. See if it's rattly or loose, if it's fluid, if it's solid. What you're trying to figure out here is this a box within a box trick? Or is this a factory sealed thing? Is it packed nice and tight? Step 4, you give the box a nice little smell, which is maybe something only those of us with larger than average noses do, I'm not sure, but you know, clues are clues, and you try to figure it out. And then finally, after enough of the steps, after enough of the clues, you step back and you declare, I know what this is. And if not out loud, at least to yourself, you decide what's in the box, which those are the worst 5 words in gift giving. I know what this is. Because if you get it right, you totally spoiled someone's surprise. I mean, someone was trying to surprise you, they wrapped it up nicely, they put it away, and you wrecked the surprise by figuring it out too soon. How could you? But if you're wrong about it, then chances are you open the present on Christmas Eve, Christmas morning, and well, you're feeling a little disappointed if it doesn't meet all of your expectations. Now, there's an old Garrett family story, a true story, that I just got to share with you real quick while we're on the subject of I know what this is. It was a story about me and my older sister. I was about 3 or 4 years old. I remember we were still living at my grandmother's house. Our house was being built. My dad was building our house. And it was not Christmas, but it was my birthday. And I was standing outside. I still remember the image. I was standing outside, and my sister came up to me with this nicely wrapped box. And it was a couple of days before my birthday. And she said, do you want to open your birthday present? And I'm 3 or 4 years old, so of course I'm like, yeah, can I open it now? And I remember being a little bit surprised because she and I hadn't been getting along very well that week, but you know, it's my birthday, so she's got to be nice to me. And so she says, okay, and she hands me this box, and I pick it up, and I feel it, and I shake it, and it's nice and rattly, which means it's probably some amazing toy with lots of pieces. And I rip open the box, and do you all know what she did? Yeah, she wrapped up a box of sticks and stones from the driveway, gave it to me on my birthday, and there was no real gift. That was it. That's all I got from her that year. So I've been scarred by this game. I know what's in the box. I don't play that game anymore. Once bitten, twice shy. I don't do it anymore. Now, part of what drives us to things like that, I know that's a lighthearted example, but we do it a lot of other ways in life. Part of what drives us to try to figure things out that we don't necessarily know or that we can't figure out on our own is this deep human need we have for certainty. It's one of our fundamental drives, right? Certainty. From the time that we're young, from the time that we're born, we depend on caregivers who, when we cry or when we are in need, they'll come and they'll attend to us. Or we need to know where our next meal is coming from, or that somehow we're gonna have what we need for life, or we need to have a safe place, a secure place to be sheltered away from the threats of the world. And if we don't have that, we grow into adults who are pretty damaged if we don't have those things. And even if we do have those things, as life goes on, we still need certainty. And we know that the world is uncertain, and so we try to create it any way that we can. In fact, I think it's this drive for certainty that actually pulls a lot of us to religion in the first place, to faith. Because we know that life isn't certain, and yet we want it to be. Life isn't predictable, and that bothers us. So we wonder, if life isn't predictable, if life isn't certain, maybe God is. But is he really? During this season of the year, Advent, Christmas, we tell this well-told story that we all we know it, we expect all the plot twists and the turns. I don't think we see it very clearly. But I think as we look at what God did for the world that first Christmas, I think we have to wonder, is God as certain and as predictable as we might think? Let's wrestle with that today. To start, we're going to look at Matthew chapter 1. This is one of the great Christmas chapters, starting in Matthew chapter 1, although we never usually look this early. Matthew chapter 1, starting at verse 1, starts this way. It says, "This is the genealogy of Jesus, the Messiah, the son of David, the son of Abraham." Significant people in his line. So go all the way back to Abraham. Abraham was the father of Isaac. Isaac, the father of Jacob. Jacob, the father of Judah and his brothers. Actually, there were 12 sons in his family. Judah, the father of Perez and Zerah, whose mother was Tamar. Perez, the father of Hezron. Hezron, the father of Ram. Ram, the father of Aminadab. Aminadab, the father of Nahshon. Nahshon, the father of Salmon. Salmon, the father of Boaz, whose mother was Rahab. Boaz was the father of Obed, whose mother was Ruth. Obed, the father of Jesse. And Jesse, the father of King David. Now, King David was the father of Solomon, whose mother had been Uriah's wife. Some of you know that story. Solomon, the father of Rehoboam. By the way, is anyone kind of worn out with this already? I know I am. These words are too hard to read. These names are too hard to read. We're going to skip ahead a little bit. Mathan, the father of Jacob. And Jacob, the father of Joseph. You've probably heard of Joseph if you've ever been to church around Christmas. Joseph is the husband of Mary, and Mary was the mother of Jesus, who is called the Messiah. Then Matthew says this, "Thus there were 14 generations in all from Abraham to David, 14 from David to the exile in Babylon, and 14 from the exile to the Messiah." So Matthew starts the story of Jesus, this really important story that we celebrate each time this year. And he starts with the genealogy. Now, in this genealogy, he says a few things. The first thing, he makes this big deal about how there were 14 generations. You catch that at the very end? 14 generations from Abraham to King David. David was the greatest king. 14 generations from David to the exile in Babylon when Israel was wiped out as a nation. And then 14 generations from the exile to Jesus. Making a big deal about that, Matthew is. I'm not sure if it's a big deal or not, but it seems like a big deal to me compared to Luke's genealogy, that in this genealogy, I don't know if you saw it, there were a lot of women mentioned, which is kind of different because lineage was carried through males, not so much females, and yet women are mentioned. And what I also find interesting in this genealogy of Jesus is that a lot of those women were foreigners. They were from other lands, other places. They were originally parts of other religion, and that seems interesting to me. I know there were a lot of names there, but maybe you could pick out a couple of big names, people like Abraham or maybe David or Solomon, great kings, famous people in Jesus's lineage. And then if you really know some of the stories of the Old Testament, and if you don't, that's okay, but you know that as we're kind of going through those names, there are some scandalous stories tucked in behind each of those names. Like if you want to go read the PG-13 version of the Bible or PG-13 church later on, go read about Judah and Tamar, his daughter-in-law. And there's kind of some crazy stuff there. Or there's a reference to David and Uriah's wife, a woman named Bathsheba, whom he had a son with. And so there are these stories of extramarital affairs and murder and seduction, which basically makes Jesus' genealogy not too different from your own, right? I mean, if you do an ancestry test, you swab your cheek, you send it in, or you dig into your genealogy, your family tree, you go through the old records, you'll probably discover that you've got a famous relative somewhere, right? Anyone know that you got a famous relative somewhere in your family tree? Anybody? You don't like Hamilton, you don't have famous people in your church. I don't know what they're in your life. I don't know what's going on with you people. Yeah, probably somewhere back, right? I mean, George Washington or King someone, and you know, like it's there. Or, maybe you've got some scandalous stories in your family tree. Or maybe some surprise interruptions in your otherwise purebred lineage. And that's just it. As Matthew begins this really important story about Jesus, he begins in such a usual way, introducing him like any of us could be introduced, with his family tree. And the only clue that Matthew gives that Jesus might even be anyone special is by using this word Messiah, which means anointed one. We talked about it a couple of weeks ago. An anointed one just means that he's going to be a king, that this Jesus is destined to be the next great king of Israel, which really isn't even that big of a deal either, is it? Because if that's all Jesus is, if he's just a king of Israel, then how does it even make sense that people like us living thousands of miles away from Israel, I've never even been, thousands of years away from the birth of this so-called king, it's really bizarre that we would even be here celebrating his birth annually, even year after year, generation after generation, right? I mean, how many birth dates of foreign monarchs do you even know besides Jesus? And if the answer is more than two, I'm going to turn you in for treason, because you're not supposed to know that stuff, right? I mean, why do we care about kings of other nations or kingdoms or countries? There must be something more to this. And Matthew, he begins his story in such a usual way, but we would never be able to predict what it all comes to. So if you are not one who is patient, you don't want to go all the way through Matthew to have him make his case for who Jesus is. If you're, in other words, one of those Cliffs Notes people, or I think the kids today use Sparks Notes, is that right? Spark Notes? What? Yeah, some of you, I see some of the teenagers, they're like, Mom, I don't know, I swear I've never heard of those in my life. Yeah, like, you know, if you just like to cut to the chase, then what you need is not Matthew, because that takes too long for Matthew to make his case. What you need is John's gospel. John also tells the story of Jesus, but right away we see what the something more is. John says this: in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was with God from the very beginning. Through him, through this word, all things were made. Without him, nothing was made that has been made. And in him was life, and that life was the light of all mankind. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. So in John's gospel, you get the same story of this time of year, but told in a very different way. No lineage, no Abraham or Noah or Adam. Instead, John goes way, way back to the very beginning, the eternal beginning, before there was a beginning. And he visits these themes of light and dark. And John says at the very beginning there was this word. He says the word, in Greek that's logos. The word logos literally means word, or it means reason, or knowledge, or it means wisdom. John says, in the beginning there was this divine reason or knowledge or wisdom from God, and it was with God in the beginning, and through him everything was made, and there's not anything that you can look around and see that didn't come from him. And then John says something really bizarre a few verses later, verse 11. He says, this logos, this divine reason or wisdom or knowledge of God who helped create everything that is and was here with God from the beginning, he came to that which was his own here, but his own did not receive him. Yet to all who did receive him, to those who believed in his name, he gave the right to become children of God. Hear this, children born not of natural descent, not like Matthew's lineage, nor of human decision, or of a husband's will, but born of God. John says there's something more about this one who's come into the world, this logos, than just human lineage. And when you believe in him, there's something more to you than just human lineage. There's a deeper element. You get to be born of God. And then he says, the word became flesh and made his dwelling among us. We have seen his glory, the glory of the one and only Son who came from the Father, full of grace and truth. Here's what John's saying from the very beginning of his gospel. He's saying, it does not matter how much you shake the box or look at the box or smell the box. Never in a million years are you gonna figure out what this Jesus is all about, what he came to do. Never in a million years are you gonna look at that family tree of David and you look at this Jesus born of Mary and Joseph. Never in a million years will you ever come to the conclusion that staring you in the face is God in human flesh. That the very being of God, the Son of God, has put on flesh and walked among us. Now here's the thing. That's a familiar story for us now at Christmas, right? We've gotten very comfortable with that story. Yeah, God put on flesh. Awesome. Born of a woman to a messy human family. A God who suddenly reveals that he is not just one God, but he's one God with three persons, three parts, but one being, one substance, three persons. Yeah. But realize that everything that John just said to the first century Jewish faithful, this would have all been unthinkable. Because from the time they were young, they were taught that God was one, not three. God is one. That's what God said. Hear, O Israel, the Lord your God, the Lord is one. There is one God. I am God alone. The whole chronicle or the whole narrative of the Old Testament is this story of God saying, there's no God but me. Egypt? Nope. Babylon? Nope. Persia? Nope. I'm the only God. And now suddenly we're supposed to believe that God is three in one? Or this idea that God, the creator God who is above all, holy and detached from his creation, sitting up above it all, separate from us, would become intermingled with his creation, especially again in that messy family tree we saw from Matthew with foreigners and scandals and infidelity. You see, to the first century listeners, readers, this would have been unthinkable, and yet we just kind of take this for granted. We believe that this is true, and it is true, and yet it's still stunning. And what this confirms for me is that God is not as predictable as we might think. And it's not just for those silly people those ancient people back then who clearly didn't read the scriptures well enough, otherwise they would know, they'd be able to figure it out. But I think that still holds true for us today. See, if you can't see it anymore in the Christmas story because it's gotten so familiar and all of the mystery and the wonder and the unpredictability of it just seems familiar to you, surely as you look around the world, you still see it, don't you? I mean, and if you look at what people are discovering about space, about the cosmos. At one point, we thought the world was flat. I know some of you still believe that. I don't. But we're just kind of this world and a canopy and stars hung, and that was it. And now we know that there is this universe that is limitless. And that each star is a different solar system. And there are mysterious things out there that we can't begin to understand, even though we can just begin to measure them. Things like black holes, and sometimes a star goes supernova and takes all matter with it, just wipes out an entire solar system. And with every question we answer out there in space, it seems like it raises 1,000 more. And I wonder, as you hear about that stuff, do you even open your mind to it? Do you listen to it? I think so often faith and science are at odds for us. I think both require humility when we're trying to figure out the world. And yet some of us, we don't want to hear that stuff because it scares us. It frightens us. When you think about the wildness of the universe, we find it to be overwhelming sometimes. Or closer to home, if you just examine your own life, honestly, aren't there seasons of your life where you have been disappointed in God for not being predictable enough? For allowing someone to be taken from your life suddenly? Or maybe it's losing a relationship, not taken from the earth, but losing a relationship. A relationship that you thought was the one, the relationship that was finally gonna fulfill you, that was finally gonna be something that would bring healing and joy into your life, and suddenly that relationship ends and you didn't see it coming. Or when we lose a job, or when our career goes up in flames, or when we suddenly find ourselves having to say goodbye to a really great chapter of life, and we're not ready to say goodbye to it yet, but the door is closing and we have to step into a new chapter of life and we don't wanna go. For me, every time this time of year, I think back now to what was 11 years ago when Jocelyn and I felt God calling us to St. Louis, and we did not want to come. In retrospect, God knew what he was doing, but at the time it didn't make any sense. We had been put in Michigan in our first church, and we were with grandparents and cousins, and we were in a good church, and we were so grateful to be building a life there and for our kids to know their grandparents and their cousins, and life was good. And then we felt God ripping us away from all that, closing that chapter, bringing us into a new chapter, and it made no sense. But we were convinced that God was telling us to go. When God shows himself to be unpredictable, when God seems uncertain, how do you worship a God like that? How do you trust him when he just seems to do whatever he wants? See, that's what John shows us. He shows us the bigger picture of this God who cannot be contained, which frankly scares a lot of us and causes doubts in our minds and threatens our worship. But here's what I want to talk about today. I want to talk about the fact that God's unpredictability, God's uncertainty, it doesn't have to give you doubt. It's okay that he is this way for several reasons. The first is he's God. He doesn't have to be predictable because he's God. And I think if we're honest, we're glad that his ways are higher than our ways, right? I mean, I'm having enough trouble in the here and now figuring out my own life. Anyone else? And so the fact that God, he doesn't make sense to me, that's probably a good thing, because after all, he's God and his ways need to be higher than my ways. His thoughts are not my thoughts, and I find that to be a very good thing. It's an unsettling thing sometimes for me, because I want to be able to predict him. I want to know exactly what he's thinking and doing, and when he does something that I don't understand, it definitely rattles me. But if I can just remember that the reason he's doing it is because he's God and I am not, then maybe that shows me that his unpredictability, the uncertainty that I sometimes feel in my relationship with him, it's not a threat, it's not a bad thing. Second, because he, unlike everyone else you know, is thoroughly good. See, God doesn't have to be predictable because he's thoroughly good. And so that means that when he's uncertain, when he's doing something unpredictable in your life, it's not the same as him being flaky or not coming through or being unreliable. And here's what's so hard for us to understand about that every other unpredictable person you know is flaky, right? They're self-interested and self-motivated. We all are. They are flawed. In other words, they are not thoroughly good. And so we start to equate in life unpredictability with people who've got bad motives, or they're not good, or bad intentions. And yet it doesn't have to be true, not with God. See, God is thoroughly good. And that means that even when he's doing stuff that we don't understand, even when he rattles us, when he boggles our minds, when he brings us out of something that we like into something we're not sure we like yet, even when that happens, we can know that he's thoroughly good, that he's on our side, that he's for us, that we will never be a casualty of his insensitivity, that we are never gonna be the punchline of a cruel joke with him. That's not who he is, because at his core, he's thoroughly good. And I know sometimes in life it doesn't feel that way, but it's true. You see, God doesn't have to be predictable, because really the reality is that it's our limited perception that's the real problem. See, it truly is that God only appears to be uncertain or unpredictable. In his core, in his being, he is the same, never changing. God is not one thing today and another thing tomorrow. But the problem is that God in his being, and we just get a glimpse of it in John chapter 1. Matthew makes it sound easy and clear. John chapter 1, we get a glimpse of it. God in his being is so vast, so expansive, that we in our limited perception can't possibly take him in all at once. And so as we see new things, sometimes it looks like God is changing or he's different, but the truth is he's not changing. We're just seeing a different part of him because he's so much greater than our ability to take him in. I love the way Paul says it in 1 Corinthians 13. These are wedding verses, and I think sometimes we just kind of lump this in as like husbands and wives talking to each other or something, like it's real romantic stuff. Paul's talking about something so much greater. He says this, for now we see, in the translation I know, it's kind of a different translation, is for now we see through a glass darkly. Now we see through a glass darkly. And in this translation, they try to make clear what that means. So we see as only in a reflection, as in a mirror. Then we shall see face to face. Now I know in part, then I shall know fully, even as I'm fully known. Again, this isn't primarily about husbands and wives knowing each other intimately. This is talking about the mystery and the wonder of God. If I could explain it another way, rather than the mirror reference, the glass darkly reference, some of you know that I wear glasses sometimes. I should wear glasses all the time, but I'm stubborn. So I don't wear them all the time. And the other problem with wearing glasses is I'm really OCD about keeping my glasses very clean. Anyone else? Like have to have really clean glasses. I wash my glasses all the time. And so I really need clean glasses all the time. And my 10-year-old son, he liked to put on my glasses sometimes. He's now got his own, but he likes to put on my glasses sometimes. And it's no fault of his, but if you've ever been around a 10-year-old boy, you just know that they can't touch anything and not leave it slimed? I'm not sure what the word is. So there are some times where, my glasses, they're filthy and I can't see through them. And the whole point of glasses is to see better. So I can't handle dirty glasses. That's what I hear Paul saying here. For now, he says, in the here and now, it's like we see through dirty glasses. Or I know you've done this even if you don't wear glasses. Seen someone glasses sitting on a table and you picked them up and you put them on and you say, oh, let me try on your glasses. And maybe their prescription's way different than yours. They're farsighted, you're nearsighted, or you don't need glasses and you put them on. You ever had that experience, right? You put them on and you're like, whoa, how do you see anything? Here's what Paul is saying about God. And I think we have to be comfortable with this. He's saying it's like we're standing on the south rim of the Grand Canyon. Anyone ever been there? Gosh, you know how vast it is. It's almost impossible to take in. You're like, what am I looking at? It is spectacular and it's complex and it's deep and it's wide. And you're standing there at the south rim of the Grand Canyon and you're looking through dirty glasses, Paul says. Or someone else's glasses, the wrong prescription. That's what he's saying. That for now, in the here and now, at best, we see God kind of in this fuzzy way we cannot take him. See God kind of in this fuzzy way we cannot take him in. And so that creates problems for us. Sometimes we think he's changing or moving, but he's not. It's just that in the here and now, we can only see him so well. But a day is coming when we will see him face to face, and we will know him fully. We will see him fully, even as right now in this moment, we are fully known. Now, some of you are sitting here today and you're going, okay, why does any of this matter? And that's a really great question. Here's why it matters. In life, you were created for different drives. One of those drives we've already talked about is a drive for certainty, right? We need certainty. But can we also acknowledge that certainty is incredibly boring? It is. When life is the same, when everything is predictable, that's the movie Groundhog Day, and then you gotta shake stuff up just to make it different, right? I mean, it's incredibly boring to live with too much certainty. You were not only created with a need for certainty, but you were also created with a need for adventure. Do you know that about yourself? If you're not sure about it, just think about it this way. As our world has become more and more certain, we've tried to make life more and more predictable and safe and enclosed, and our temperature, in the house is 71 degrees all year long, and the same with our car. And, we control our environment. We try to make everything as predictable as possible. What has happened? What has happened is these desires for adventure leak into our predictable worlds. It's the TV shows that we watch or the books that we read. I mean, like Hunger Games and all this dystopian stuff, or The Walking Dead. I mean, this craving for adventure, or the video games that we play. I think at least half of them, 3/4 of them, are some quest for something, right? Or we think about the ways that we live vicariously through the adventures of others, the way we study other people who are living adventures, or we watch their YouTube channel, or we watch their documentaries, or we live vicariously through a friend. Or as our worlds have gotten so predictable and certain, and we've tried to eliminate any risk or uncertainty or aberration, think about how other things seep in, the unhealthy things, serial affairs, or drug use. Or think about the ways that we roll the literal or figurative dice with our safety and security. Why? Because certainty isn't enough. We're also created with the need for adventure. We need both. And here's why what I'm talking about today matters so much. God didn't just come into the world to keep you safe, to make everything predictable. Instead, what God is doing today and what God is doing this season is he's inviting you out of the straitjacket of a life that is always certain, a life that is always predictable. In other words, a life that is completely boring. And he's inviting you into the greatest adventure imaginable. The adventure of getting to know him better. See, that's what Jesus is coming into the world means. Yes, we get to know God a little bit better through Jesus, but it's not like when Jesus comes, all the mysteries are solved. What Jesus means is that the unsearchable, unknowable God is inviting us into a journey of endless discovery. He wants to be known, and he wants us to know the privilege of knowing him. That's even what Jesus' death means. If you can summarize Jesus' death in a bumper sticker, you're probably doing it wrong. It's so much more profound than that. It's mysterious, it's ever expansive, and God is inviting us through the life and the death of Jesus, yes, to know him more, to trust him, to trust his love and his grace as being certain. But bigger than that, he's inviting us into this adventure of step by step getting to know him. And he's vast, and he's high, and he's wide, and he's deep, and he's wild, but he's so good. He's inviting us into a journey to know him better. And you see, it all begins for fervent believers, or maybe curious skeptics. It all begins by no longer being willing to play this game, I know what this is, I know who this God is, I have him figured out game. It all starts when we stop trying to put God in our boxes and we let him be who he is. We let him be God. But we also accept the invitation to pursue him and to behold him bit by bit, piece by piece, dirty glasses and all, until the day we get to ultimately see him clearly, face to face. If I could ask anything for us this season of Advent, it would be that kind of pursuit would be our pursuit. Pray with me. God in heaven, I thank you for your mystery, for knocking me back on my heels, by changing things up on me, for not always being certain in the ways that I would expect, not letting life be certain, not letting me fall into the prison of predictability.